and you're all very, very welcome. Could I ask you, please, for those of us who haven't attended one of our IoD Surrey Connect meetings in the past, could I ask you, please, just to bear with me whilst we go through some of the foundations that I hope will build a great meeting for us all here today. We're all here to share and to gain an edge with each other. And this meeting is being recorded. And I would ask you, please, to very shortly mute yourself and also turn your camera off during the interview process, which myself and Ed will be going through very shortly. I would, as Ed and I are having our sort of brief conversation, which will probably be about 20-25 minutes, please do be sharing your own insights for fellow directors and business owners in the chat area, because they're valuable and I will be sharing those. And also, our conversation will hopefully spark questions in your mind. And could I ask you, please, to note those questions in the chat area. And if you put a capital Q in front of your question, that would be very, very useful, because we can then scan through your questions. The way I found this has worked best over the number of sessions that we've run in IoD Surrey is I will scan through the questions and then invite the questioner to fire up their camera and unmute themselves and ask the question. In the interests of time, can we please just ask one question? No statements and no follow-on questions. I know that's a bit tough, but we might have time for follow-on questions. But in the interests of fairness, I do want to get everybody as much opportunity to ask Ed questions as possible. And finally, please do complete the questionnaire. It'll take you less than 1 minute. Please do complete the online evaluation form immediately after this session. I will post the link to that very shortly, and I will also be posting it towards the end of this session. So please do take a minute to complete that. So it'll be about 20-25 minutes, Ed and I having a conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions. Yeah. Ed, it's wonderful to have you here.
Great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. And I guess I must say, first of all, congratulations on getting your home move completed in this very interesting time.
Thank you.
And I am sure that you're surrounded by removal boxes and what have you. But we're not going to be talking about the content of those boxes. We'll be more interested, I think, in the content of the little red boxes that you're making your contributions towards on our behalf. So I thought it would be useful just to get a sense, going right back to the purposes of the IoD, to get a sense from you about, the IoD's Royal Charter says that we should represent the interests of members of the business community to government. What does that mean in practice, Ed?
Well, so in normal times, before coronavirus, the process is relatively straightforward. We gain the opinions, the views of members through regular monthly surveys, through lots of information we get directly from members, and lots that's filtered up through branch and region chairs in particular, and regional teams generally. We also have the ambassador network, provide lots of info. Outside of this current crisis, the issues that matter to IoD members tend to actually be relatively stable. It's obviously the economy in general, skills, regulation, tax, infrastructure, all of those kind of business foundations, I guess. And because we are obviously we're a very we're a cross-sector group, and there are IoD members from every part of the UK, every sector of the economy, all sizes of company. So we try to focus on those foundational issues which have biggest benefits, the broadest number of members. As you mentioned, the charter. There's another part of the charter is about our dual role, so representing the members' interests and also trying to further the case of good governance. So we have a particular interest, obviously, in company law, in any kind of regulation around governance. So those are kind of the two pillars, and we take that information, we provide it directly to government ministers. We work with civil servants. In the business department would be our main contact, but also transport, education, treasury, HMRC. I won't list them now, but there's just a vast, long list of departments, regulators, non-departmental bodies. We also talk to the opposition and to individual MPs, really sort of trying to get as many avenues and many channels in as possible to build support for the things that we think are important for our members, and try and advance that case for an economy that encourages wealth creation and entrepreneurship, which is the sort of the second part of that bit of the charter you read.
Absolutely, and it would be remiss of me, I guess, as IoD chair in Surrey, not to encourage everybody at this point to rush to the IoD website and sign up for Policy Voice, because that's the mechanism by which we as members feed answers and sort of insights back up to you and your team, so that you can go and talk to these relevant bodies.
Yeah.
Ed, you mentioned a number of organs of government there. Could you briefly just give us an idea as to where you do spend most of your time, effort, and energy within all those government departments?
So I think it's worth saying that it does change slightly from from administration to administration. So I've actually been in the IoD for 10 years, and the personalities involved, how people run their governments, change. So you might have heard that people describe Boris Johnson as not necessarily a details person. People have said maybe more of a chairman rather than a CEO. To use a governance analogy, it'll be familiar to you. Clearly it's a very unusual time because he was out for a bit. But so I think at the moment the real power lies with the Treasury. They're making the spending decisions. So we're probably directing a lot of our attention there. Obviously some things that we've contributed to, which I think will be very positive, like the furlough scheme, VAT, some tax deferrals, grants, although slightly patchy. But loads of money has come out of that. Very much has come from the Treasury. The business department probably slightly more limited at the moment. Things like the insolvency bill, which has just come out this week. But I would say, kind of Treasury, business, number 10 as well. Although they are obviously very, very broad room at the moment. Number 10. And public health kind of concerns taking absolutely uppermost. So the Treasury are where the big decisions are made at the moment.
And I guess you mentioned there earlier on that you've been with the IoD now for nearly 10 years. And, I'm just wondering if there's been any situation like this in your experience, and also about how dealing with the government has changed as a result of the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I think looking back, so I joined sort of shortly after the 2010 election, and at that time, it's funny to look back. Everyone said coalition government. We've never had this before. It's going to fall apart in a matter of months. Or the UK just isn't used to do this. But actually, probably 2010 to 2015, in retrospect, is a period of stability, really. So every kind of everything, we had the Scotland referendum, the EU referendum, and at the time everyone was saying, this is unprecedented, kind of anarchy almost. But no, I mean, nothing has been on the scale of of the coronavirus, both just the huge economic impact, but also the way government has responded and the speed. Things like the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, that they would be consulted on. They would take a couple of years, you would have thought, normally to get the legislation, everything together, and it happened in a couple of weeks, in a few weeks. So there are definitely gaps. We're going to be talking about those as well. But in a way, it has been quite amazing to watch just how quickly, and they needed to be, just how quickly the government has moved, and civil servants have moved on some of these big programs.
Does that suggest sort of an extra effort on behalf of, especially the sort of the civil service, or does it suggest that maybe the civil service hasn't been sort of working at the same pace as we would in the business sector?
Yeah, so it's obviously the situation is desperate. It requires speed. So it's probably produced a reaction you would never get another time. I think there's probably a bit of both. Like, definitely, the civil service. This isn't just a broad brush insult, but it is a kind of status quo orientated machine, and you'll have heard millions of stories of politicians who wanted to do something and it's been slowed down. Sometimes because the politicians are trying to do something stupid. It's not always that it's a brilliant idea. But no, it's definitely, I think it's shown actually that the government can do stuff more quickly. And what will be interesting to see is, does this kind of slight radicalism, does it continue afterwards? And is that a good idea? Do we? There was a lot in the papers this morning about the government, trying to bring back some supply chains from China, some production of, whether it's PPE or other things, but actually a much less kind of free trade, open kind of approach that maybe we have pursued since the 80s. I'm sure people have different views on that, but is this the start? Is this just a temporary thing for coronavirus, or is this a long-term thing where actually the state looked quite different?
What's your sense on that, Ed? Because politicians are good at sort of talking, journos are good at reporting that talk and trying to mould interest and beat their own drum. But it always seems to me that business and our sort of liberal sort of economy is the best value creator on the planet. And whilst the politicians and the journos talk and write, we get stuff done. I mean, are you seeing sort of more of a get stuff done sort of approach, or is it sort of just a response to a crisis and, it might go back to the way it was before, more considered, sort of slower pace, more deliberate decisioning?
I mean, people do say that the way our system is set up, democratic systems in general probably are slightly, they're much more responsive and they are less good at planning for the long term. Now, this is not at all to say that China's a model that we would want to follow, but the counterpoint is they are much better at building infrastructure. For example, we take ages over it and then it never happens anyway. My sense is that probably the changes, there will be some changes, and I think the changes we'll see are probably around things like sustainability, for example. I think probably there will be a push, just because the government will end up probably owning stakes in quite a lot of big companies, or being much more involved in energy and manufacturing, that actually they will be prepared to take bigger moves than they would have beforehand. I think it's really difficult, because clearly, as you say, the businesses create the jobs and the tax revenues that ultimately pay for public services and everything else, but they've been forcibly shut down by the government. This isn't a normal recession. No. So they are, that requires more support, and they're also just not going to be able to get up and running, back to speed anytime soon for from our surveys, about most of our members say it take maybe 3 to 4 weeks to get their operations up and running again. And yeah, interested to hear people's thoughts around that. But again, I think it's about a quarter who say that under social distancing on a 2 meter, they can't operate at all. So it's that means that the government is going to have to be much more involved in a way that normally, we wouldn't want. We wouldn't. Our members want to stand on their own 2 feet. They don't want to be dependent upon government. But it does, for the next few months at least, and then longer term, I think it will bring some changes. And I think probably it will be around manufacturing, supply chains. Trade is obviously going to change quite a bit anyway because of leaving the EU and new trade deals we're trying to do. So that's the kind of area where I would really think the government is going to be more involved for longer.
Cool. Thank you. We don't necessarily want to talk about personalities, but we can't help but think of two individuals at the moment who had a hell of a thing to do, really. I'd be interested to get your take on Rishi Sunak. I mean, he became Chancellor with all of this, sort of just immediately hitting him. What's your impression of him?
So I met him he just started. It was before the budget, and so in a normal processes every year the IoD will meet the Chancellor. We submit representations, and then we have a follow-up meeting. And at this point, actually, we were before coronavirus had really hit the UK, we were focusing mainly on investment. Because for a long time, actually, our members would be saying that they felt the businesses were going pretty well, but investment intentions were really low, which was quite worrying. How things have changed. But he's very energetic. I think we have seen this big response from the Treasury, and some of that is definitely from him. He's a guy who wants to get stuck in and do things. He's very, as you say, it's not all about personality, but he's charming, intellectually curious. He's quite persuasive. I think he's actually, he's won quite a lot of admirers, and particularly, sort of across the political spectrum. Actually, it's been quite interesting to watch. But I think, the main, as much as as far as personality does matter, I think that kind of, he was already someone who wanted to get stuck in and change things. And then, that's why I think he was ready to react very quickly. Although, there are still, as I said, there are still areas where we would like more, but we're going to keep banging that drum.
And he does appear to be well received by the general public as well as by the political commentators, and it's interesting to get your sort of insight on him there. And then of course the other sort of big sort of personality change, I guess, and you mentioned that the IoD also speaks with and has channels through to the senior team in the opposition. And I'm just wondering sort of what changes you've sensed since Keir Starmer became leader of the opposition.
So, that has been quite noticeable. We obviously Starmer was in the previous cabinet, and we used to talk to him quite a bit around Brexit, and he's an intelligent guy, well briefed, quite easy to deal with. I think the major change that I would see is that with Ed Miliband now as Shadow Business Secretary and Annalisa Dodds as Shadow Chancellor, they have, I think they are very open actually to business. Now, there's loads of things we probably won't agree on, but they have been quite useful and supportive around the support mechanisms. We had a call with Emily Band earlier this week. We were talking about this issue of directors' dividends, which have not been included in any of the income support schemes. And actually, it's quite strange that on one hand, we've got quite a lot of Tory MPs who support us, Bernard Jenkins, who's just been elected chair of the liaison committee. and Ed Miliband actually pretty much on the same page, and then it's the government who don't seem to think that, you know, owner directors who pay themselves through dividends are worthy of support. So it's a slightly strange position. But I think, you know, they've been taking they're not opposing for opposition's sake. They are trying to be quite constructive in general. I think, you know, it's probably not too controversial to say that I think Keir is probably more an intellectual heavyweight than Jeremy Corbyn. I think you can see that at PMQs. So it's definitely, I think the government have a tougher job with this opposition than they did with the previous one.
It certainly seems that way from the outside. I'm conscious that I want to get our members and guests involved in the conversation, and just to wrap up our part of the conversation, looking longer term, how are IoD members going to be able to rebuild from this, and what does the government need to do to make that possible, Ed?
So I think, as we were discussing, there has been quite a big package of measures, whether that's the self-employment scheme, JRS, tax deferrals, various things. But really, probably that's kind of the first wave of support. There's going to have to be continued measures for some time. So we know that they've extended the furlough scheme, but we don't know yet the details of whether people are going to be able to use it part-time, how much employers are going to have to contribute. So that's going to be, we're talking to them, we're talking to actually the Education Department next week as well about kind of training when people are furloughed, because I think that's going to be a massive thing. We had an existing skills issue, and things the government had been doing for example, the apprenticeship levy, weren't really tackling the full problem. We're going to have a massive gap as people do, and I think I've seen a couple of questions on the chat around this. The furlough scheme will be withdrawn at some point. There are going to be redundancies; they're going to be pretty widespread, and then you've got to retrain these people to get new jobs somehow. So that's going to be something the government's really going to have to look to do quite a bit on. One of the biggest areas of kind of concern for us is around debt. So the bounce back loan scheme, the coronavirus business interruption loan, they've helped companies stay afloat, and the take up's been very widespread. And there are lots of teething problems, but generally speaking, actually members are quite positive about bounce back loans. But it's a vast amount of debt that small businesses in particular are going to have, which under normal conditions, actually most IoD members really are quite debt averse, because they like financing themselves through profits, and that it's entirely sort of sensible approach. So the government is going to have to do something, whether it's around converting some of the debt to equity, or maybe some debt forgiveness. Or there's one idea that we've been playing around with is, could you have some kind of equivalent to the student loan scheme where it's kind of income contingent, you don't have to pay it back initially until your profits recover, or there's after a certain amount of time they get written off. So I think those two, skills and debt, probably are two of the massive ones that are going to be big long-term challenges for the government.
Cool. And I guess that final sort of question probably will release a flood of questions from our members and guests here today. So Ed, thank you for that so far. What we're going to do now is we're going to open this up to the members and guests, and I'll be scrolling through the chat. As we said in the foundation section of the meeting, one question, please, no follow-on questions and no statements, so as we can get through as many questions as possible. Could I call upon Bob Hughes to fire up the camera and unmute himself and ask Ed the question?
Thanks, Richard. I run a charity delivering sensory services across Surrey, and we've already found it, as you were indicating earlier, that things, what you might call second rank issues, can get done at speed. when they started the number 10 briefings, there was no British Sign Language interpreting. The British Deaf Association, who I'm afraid couldn't lobby their way out of a paper bag, started a petition. I rang my Member of Parliament, who lobbied Matt Hancock. And I think there's much more to go. For instance, the one I'm going to be working on is the 111 service. They keep saying, if you've got a problem, ring the 111 service. You can't talk to the 111 service if you're deaf or hard of hearing, which is quite a lot of people, potentially a couple of 100,000 even in Surrey. So what's your advice about those second rank issues?
So, I mean, I think you'd be doing the right thing in going to your MP in particular. I mean, it sounds so basic almost, but it's amazing how effective, the pressure that an MP can actually put on their party. Obviously, it helps if they're an MP from government party, but it's not. Yeah, it doesn't rule it out. And some of you will probably have more effective MPs than others. I mean, there are some MPs that are notorious for getting their pet projects or their individual things out of government, and some MPs aren't as effective, unfortunately. I mean, one thing that is quite good is to get if you have other people in your group or association or people with shared interests, to get all of them to contact their MPs. The one thing I would advise against doing, you see these like pro forma letters where they send it out and then they just get bombarded. MPs don't read those, but if it's a constituent who has an issue and they make their case and they make it passionately, I think that can really help. And obviously, the same goes for local media as well. Your local newspaper, again, it can embarrass or nudge a local MP, and that's a really good place to start. And then obviously, if you're saying that the relevant trade association maybe isn't that great, but there is value in national bodies because they do, they have an ability to get in national media and go to APPGs. I mean, the other thing is that most MPs are actually relatively accessible, and all party parliamentary groups are normally actually looking for people with direct experience of a subject. I think people think sometimes that the Parliament or government actually has access to this information, but a lot of the time it's just that they're running around like headless chickens doing various things, and they just missed something they didn't know, and something being brought to their attention can actually really work.
Yes, and I certainly, I found that our MP in Southwest Surrey has been very, very active and very approachable, and others I've had sort of contact with, Surrey Heath and what have you. So I think MPs, most of them are more approachable than most people think they probably are. Roger Kimber, you got a question, please.
Hi Richard, hi Ed. So it's really about given all the current situation, what the IoD stance is regarding the UK leaving the EU at the end of the year. Do you feel that given this amount of unprecedented time that we've been facing and the issues that we're dealing with, the last thing on our minds right now should be trying to negotiate our way out the block? What are your views on that?
So I think the thing that's come through strongly in all my conversations with members is that they aren't thinking about preparing for Brexit at the end of the year, for the end of the transition period even. I think the same is probably true for the immigration system, which is also meant to be coming into effect at the same time. And the government is it's meant to be consulting on the moment, but obviously no one has any bandwidth to focus on anything apart from coronavirus, and for a lot of companies just survival. So I mean, we certainly think that there needs to be a phased approach. This isn't really a comment on Brexit or otherwise. Clearly it is a legal fact. It's more just about the implementation. The talks don't seem to be going particularly well, it has to be said. Now, it's politics, so there's always going to be quite a lot of noise and argy-bargy. On the one hand, I think the government are very serious about the deadline. there is definitely a school of thought which says that we're in the middle of a massive recession anyway. Would you even really be able to tell or notice any difference? And and international trade flows have just collapsed. So there's a slightly kind of, well, let's just push through and do it. So I certainly, if anyone has any bandwidth at all, they need to be keeping in their mind that this isn't going away. I think it would be, this isn't a judgment of whether or not it's a good idea, but I think it will be unwise to expect an extension. It might still happen when we know in the next couple of months, but at the moment it doesn't look likely to me.
No, and I guess it's important to recognise, because I've been asked this many times when Brexit was the flavour, all right, and people were saying, why are the IoD this and why are the IoD that and what's the IoD's position here? To which my stock answer has always been, the IoD doesn't have a formal position on this at all. It just reflects its membership's concerns. But it is interesting that some people out there seem to think that the IoD has a pro or anti, sort of Brexit stance.
Yeah, no, it's so. At the time we took a decision to not campaign on either side. We did poll members extensively, and we published the results. And it was before the referendum was like 2-1 in favour of Remain, but there is quite a lot of water under the bridge since then. And generally speaking, talking to members, there are still very strong opinions on both sides. But generally, the question is the practicalities that they're most interested in. And that does make the timing such a difficult issue, because there will be, depending on the exact deal, there will be substantial adaptation that is needed. Customs forms, I mean, the Northern Ireland, more details were published this week, and I'm sure if any of you send goods to and from Northern Ireland, this is going to be a fairly major piece of work to get ready for that. So that's where we're focusing on. And I don't know if any of you have come across Ali Benson, but we have a very, very good head of EU and trade who's really on top of these issues, and has been doing various webinars and things. So do look out for her. Yeah,
she's very vocal on Twitter, and she's in my influencing stream in my Twitter account. Fortunately, I never look at the main Twitter stream at all, but she's in my influencing stream, and very, very sort of straight bat sort of person. Ian Martin, you've got a question.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Good. Thanks very much, Richard and Ed. I work for the Enterprise M3 Growth Hub, and we've been helping companies historically grow. Since COVID, we've been focusing on stabilizing, or surviving and stabilizing before getting back to growth. What really worries me is we can all see an inevitable unemployment crisis coming. Nobody wants it, but it's going to be inevitable. And I was just interested to know if your talks have revealed what sort of early stage planning, if any, is going on to address that and really preempt it and plan, because the ability to both retrain and reskill people for the new normal is going to be absolutely critical. I'm just interested in your views.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the government is terrified of how much money it's spending. I think it's one of the factors to consider. So I don't know if you saw, but the latest public sector finance figures out this morning. This is World War II levels of public debt we're talking about. So they've been, obviously they've made announcements, and they've been trying to signal that businesses are going to have to get used to the fact that the furlough scheme will be withdrawn from October, and there will be a contribution before that. They have not decided the level of contribution and exactly how it's going to be conducted, whether it's just you have to pay a certain percentage of salary, or whether it's perhaps paying tax components of employment. There is some suggestion from the Department for Education that they might try and link skills spending to the furlough scheme. But really, my impression is that this is all pretty early stage thinking around this. Obviously, DfE is have got a lot of its time taken up with the schools issue when they can reopen, which is obviously one of the political hot potatoes at the moment. I think the Treasury is increasingly making a calculation, which is that they can't afford the furlough forever, and they are going to accept pretty high unemployment because they're going to be paying for that through universal credit, and universal credit is cheaper than JRS. So from the Treasury's calculation is about money. DfE, I don't think have really fully got around how we're going to reskill people, and neither, to be honest, have the business department. The business department feel like they're being slightly sidelined from the major decision making at the moment. It's maybe a touch harsh, but Treasury drives everything. Other departments are kind of scrabbling to catch up. And as you would have seen, things change every day. Guidance isn't. I wouldn't even say all government departments understand the current position or guidance exactly the same way. So it's there is a little bit of kind of scrabbling around in the background going on. So I appreciate that's probably not very reassuring answer, but I mean we are talking to them every day. We've got a meeting with DfE next week. I mean, if you had any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Obviously, I'll put my email on the group, and if people want to drop me a line afterwards, that'd be great.
That'd be brilliant, and we'll be getting a mail out to everybody, Ed. After this, Polly will be sending that out on behalf of IoD Surrey. Yeah. We've got a question from James Morris. Hi, James.
Morning, guys. Yeah, I was just wondering, Ed, I know things like the furlough scheme and these measures in general are huge. But do you think sort of the Treasury are minded and they really take into concepts that we are in a policy enforced recession? It's not something that's just appeared. Admittedly, the virus has just kind of appeared, I guess. But do you think they're truly mindful of that?
I think so. I mean, I don't think you would have seen anything like the scale of what we've already had if they didn't understand that. Basically, the government has told everyone to shut. I think it's because we're in uncharted territory. All the governments are doing things slightly differently, but actually, in terms of the international rankings, our response has been relatively generous. If you look at JRS, for example, most other European countries have had an employer contribution element right from the beginning. What I'm not sure they totally get is how long the support is going to have to go on, and it's going to have to be much more flexible as well. So it comes through so strongly about from members about the furlough scheme that they are going to need support, and it's going to be gradual coming back. So they're really going to need to be able to bring people back part time and still have part of the wages supported for when people aren't there. And not just the physical challenge of taping stuff off and getting screens and staggering shifts and all of that, but just that the demand is going to be is only going to come back really slowly as well for some sectors in particular. I think we're pressing at home. We're not the only ones. The other business groups, lots of MPs. So there are lots of voices behind it. I do have a slight worry that at some point the calculation becomes just look at that mounting debt pile, and that's not obviously the government should be quite scared about that debt. I think we should all be quite scared about that debt. But at the moment, I think the risk is not acting fast enough. So I'd agree with you, and we are we're trying to hammer that home at every opportunity. But yeah, do keep doing with your MPs as well. Obviously, the more voices, the better.
Absolutely. And I guess sort of tangential to that in a way, Dominic Brockus, you're on the line. Just put your question to Ed there, please.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, Ed. Thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us. I'm in the sort of financial world. If we take markets as a bit of a positive barometer of signs of recovery, i.e. we've made up probably half of the low point round about the kind of the end of February, beginning of March. To what extent are the government thinking about recovery and the strength of that? And in particular, there's lots of anecdotal conversations about some industries will do really well out of the current crisis, and some will suffer and continue to suffer for a very long time. How are the government thinking about recovery, and what's their thoughts on the sectors that will really struggle and those that they think will have a more positive reaction?
So they definitely are thinking about it sector by sector, and some that I mentioned earlier, some stuff around manufacturing in particular, because obviously, we all saw the news about Rolls-Royce. It's a sector that's getting absolutely hammered. Although ironically, in a way, there are other things that ventilators, PPE. So some parts of it actually have responded quite well. Although the government scheme to get businesses involved really hasn't been much of a success. I'd say they went for a couple of companies, and we were contacted by loads of smaller members who said, that we can definitely do this, but they never heard back. So they're definitely looking at it on a sector by sector thing. I think one of the difficulties there is that the broad sectors are not really how the economy works. So we talked to plenty of smaller companies in a supply chain who supply a manufacturer, but they might not technically be classed as a manufacturer. And the link between manufacturing and servicing those products and all those kinds of things. And of course, what if you're hospitality, which has had some protection, but you don't have the right SIC code. So, but you're connected to it, and all of your business is dependent upon them. Lots of ID members are in professional services who are very closely linked to a particular industry, but they don't qualify. So I think we're trying to warn the government against focusing too much just on a kind of sector by sector basis. The thinking there, so there is thinking going on about the recovery, and as you say, things are picking up a little bit now. And I've been quite negative so far, but there are also positive stories we've heard, and some of the things to highlight here. There are lots of members who have very quickly adapted what they produce or their business model. It's about 40% of our members actually say that they will keep in place changes that they brought in for coronavirus afterwards. Loads of office space will be given up, and people who thought that before remote working wasn't going to work have actually discovered that it can. So actually, permanent long-term cost reductions, I think, are offered to quite a lot of companies. So there's businesses have moved very quickly. I mean, to go back to Richard's point, they're always going to move quicker, frankly, than government was. So I think there's a bit of room for optimism there. But as you say, some sectors it's just going to be so much harder. In the pub trade, it's going to they've been asking for a 1 meter distancing rather than 2 meter distancing. But there are some people who are just going to take a very long time, and that's why the support needs to be a little bit more kind of flexible and nuanced as we get, I guess, towards the back end of the year.
Yeah, so flexible, nuanced, and sector-based, and I guess sort of trying to sort of move the whole economy up in one lump is a practical impossibility. So seeing where the wins have to be. David Seal, you're on the line, please.
Great, got that working. Hi, Richard. Hi, Ed.
Hi.
Really, you've touched upon my question a bit earlier on, actually, but it was about HMRC. Obviously, a lot of businesses have had conversations with HMRC, and HMRC have kindly deferred payments such as VAT, corporation tax. eventually they're going to want that money off of businesses. As you say, the level of indebtedness of the government's pretty high. How do you think they're going to do that, and when do you think they're going to do that? Obviously, you talked about a sectoral approach. If they use the sectoral approach, some people are going to suffer more than others, and some people can pay it back faster than others. So, what do you think they're going to do?
So, I mean, ultimately, HMRC administers it, but the Treasury has to decide. So they, because unlike some things like the grants and other bits, as you say, the tax has just been deferred. It is still due. So it's going to create some big problems later on. We would certainly recommend that they allow, they stagger it over quite a period of time. It's not just suddenly it's turned back on and you owe all of the back tax immediately. So it's going to be certainly more than one tax year. So we'll be pushing for a more kind of staggered approach, and also just a bit more forbearance as well. I have to say I've been quite impressed by HMRC in that normally they are, I say, IoD members' least favourite part of government, but the furlough scheme, generally speaking, the reports from members have been really positive. Automatic payments coming in quickly. Everyone who's asked for a tax deferral's got one. Not obviously there have been some people who had problems, but generally speaking, actually it's been pretty good. So it does show that they can, if they're given strong direction by a government to support businesses, they can do it. So I'm really hoping that continues.
Yes, absolutely. And again, probably sort of tangential and sort of leading through that. Agatha, you've got a question.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
I've got questions regarding startups. There is a lot of help and schemes to be able to well-established businesses. But what about guys who, were in the process of starting up businesses, invest awful loads of money and effort and everything, and everything is on the hold basically. Is there any plan to address this issue? Because we are facing not only this gap of real investments, but this gap in the entrepreneurship stream, right? It's gonna impact economy as well. And as you mentioned rightly, we can't look on the overall economic and well-being balance in the country based on some kind of classifications.
Yeah, absolutely, and loads of IoD members would fall into that entrepreneurial category. So the support so far, and there was yesterday or the day before, a £500 million scheme for startups was launched, essentially match funded by the government. It is already been oversubscribed, and I think the government, a lot of people do kind of fall into this trap where when they think entrepreneurship, they think of the whizzy tech companies, and obviously those are very important. Actually, Britain's quite good at them, but they are a very small part of what entrepreneurship means and what in the startup environment. So we have been pushing for extension of the grants system really through local authorities, because to early stage companies. Because really, it's not a huge amount of money that they need. It's a small amount. But so we were talking to the local government association a few days ago. They're worried that the grant money is already running out. Actually, local authorities have been relatively good in getting the money out because they know more about their local businesses than central government. But there's just simply not enough cash. It's about 600 million so far. So if you put that against the multiple billions that have been spent on furlough, you could increase that small amount, relatively speaking, and actually help quite a lot of startups. Just to add one further point on that, it's really connected to this whole issue of the income support gap for owner directors as well, who are really in this category. Because if you're self-employed, you can get the grant. If you're an employee, you can get furloughed. But we've certainly been hearing it's really difficult if you're a owner, director, founder of a company, furloughing yourself is it's almost impossible and not really kind of in spirit of what a director's duties are. But then you're not able to access support for dividend income. So that's why I think probably more than anyone, we've been pushing on this, and we have been building a coalition. We've got support from Bernard Jenkins, who I mentioned earlier. Now, I think this is where it comes in, that the government is looking at the numbers and going, God, how much money have we been spending? But we're not letting up, because it's just this really vital group, and if we're entrepreneurs are where the future growth and the future ideas come from. So absolutely, we do think this group's been overlooked so far.
And as we all know, Ed, and as I hope the government is increasingly being made aware of, a lot of directors who pay themselves, sort of a service company, and they pay themselves in dividends. It's these are not the whiz bangers. These are the people who very often have to provide service through a service company. I think the more that you and the IoD and other bodies can make the government aware that it's not fat cats, it's just the way that business tends to be done. I think that would be a big carry away certainly from the IoD Surrey group, where we've got a lot of startups, a lot of small businesses, a lot of people who are sort of doing that sort of income dividend split, but for very, very sort of understandable business reasons.
No, absolutely. And there was this false idea. I think the Chancellor said that, he was talking about people earning over £200,000 a year, and that absolutely is not the majority. And also, just you can have a cap on it. The self-employment scheme has a 50 grand cap, so why not just put a limit so it's not, for the very well off who understandably don't, you're not targeting them, but it's the small guys and the new companies as well, where because it takes years to go off the ground sometimes. We're absolutely we are. I mean, it does feel a little bit like banging your head against a brick wall sometimes, but keep banging.
Keep banging, Ed, please. Keep banging. Yamila, hi. Yamila, you've got a lovely long statement there, but I am going to ask you to condense that to one question for Ed, please.
Yes. Hello, Richard. Hello, Ed. Hello, members. My question is, given the comments you've made, do you now believe that government will take the lessons from this tragic time and start to plan and invest in a connected, not department siloed approach? And it plays very much to core topics that you started off talking about. I'll just pick three which are interrelated, but you could pick any of the 6 or 7 that you mentioned. Digital skills gap, infrastructure, taxation and grant support. All of those three are interrelated. But they all sit under different government departments. Do you think they're going to actually start to be very grown up in their approach, as we do in businesses, where we team with different departments to pull a plan together, rather than saying, this is the plan for this, so it doesn't work or connect the dots in the right way for us? Because we need the broadband everywhere. We need people being able to remote work. There are so many more efficiencies for organisations. We need to close that digital skills gap, invest in the right skills at uni, etc.
I completely agree, and I'm afraid I don't see any immediate end to the silo effect in government. You're completely right. The idea that you have skills sitting in the Department of Education, and then kind of a bit of an overlap with the business department. But obviously, if you're a business, you want the skills, so you don't see that separation is pointless. I mean, there was I don't know how closely you followed the career of Dominic Cummings, but there was some talk before this crisis of a sort of a super economic department, which would effectively combine Treasury and Bays and probably bits of DFE. I don't think there's probably much appetite for changing departments around at the moment, But that said, maybe it is an opportunity because, as I was saying, the government has moved much faster than before. And we've got DFE next week, and in fact, every week the next few weeks, and we will certainly be making that case. This is surely the opportunity you would have thought to go, look, the previous system, apprenticeships are good, but they're not right for everything. Much more bite-sized courses, small learning, digital learning is surely the future. It's the way business has gone. Government has to catch up with that. We might have a slightly more opportunity to do that now because traditional apprenticeships are not being delivered at the moment because of social distancing. So allowing companies to spend more of that money, the money that they paid in on short form digital learning. A positive takeaway is that I think we've got more of an opportunity to do that now. They were very intransigent before, but I think I'll tell you what, I'll let you know in a few weeks.
Okay, cool stuff. Thank you so much, Ed. We got a question from Jules. Jules, a very quick question, please.
Yeah, I'll keep it very succinct because I can spot your minutes are ticking.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work you're doing. I'm Kent Chair. I can see the benefit permeating through to our membership. My question is, this crisis will slowly stop being a crisis. We'll move into second and third phases. How are you going to keep the momentum going in terms of the questioning of government and moving that through to the membership and the volunteers?
So I think the big opportunity for us is to really raise the status and the interest and awareness of the role of the director, because that's clearly, it's the thing that's distinctive about us. I saw a question, to working with the big five, the business groups. Everyone's kind of got their own thing, but directors is the IoDs, and everyone knows that. So certainly, things we're talking about are coming off the back of this. How do we make it clear that the economy needs talented, ethical, skilled, knowledgeable directors if we're going to rebuild? And there's actually previously from surveys of members, there is lots of support for the idea of having a director's code, which is different to the corporate governance code, which is for the operation of the board as a whole. Now, we don't want to get tied up in loads of red tape and bureaucracy, but how do we raise that to say, you really can't think, you're going to succeed as a company if you don't pay attention to the governance and to the individual directors. So that's our chance.
Cool. Thank you. We're almost there. So I know there's other questions, and I'm sorry, but I know that Paul Adams, who serves on my committee, wants to talk about the finances, and there's other questions there. But I think in the interest of everybody's agenda, we need to call it an end there. All I would say is, on everybody's behalf, thank you so much, Ed, for sharing some of those insights with us, and thank you to everybody for participating and sharing their questions and their thoughts here. We will be getting an edited version of this video out to everybody. And before you go, could I ask you please to hit the link in the chat for the 1 minute evaluation form. It definitely will help us and guide us in how we drive these sorts of events for our members and our business friends in the community. So all that remains for me to say is thank you, be safe, be strong, rock on. We've got another 7 hours of work ahead of us today. So well done, everybody. And I very much look forward to welcoming you back to another IoD Connect event in Surrey soon. Take care for now.
Thanks, Richard. Bye. Bye.